This is Stewart's Creek down here, and there was a pipeline that came down and ran through here, and first time that I can recall in '77 moving cattle, that was a trail down through there that you could negotiate. The creek was not there. You could just drive wherever you wanted to. It was, if you look on the horizon over there, there's a tank. That's Bob. Bob's ashes are at the tank. Bob worked for the guy that did the trenching to put the water line in, and he thought so much of the solar collector over here that's pushing the water up there, and when he died he wanted his ashes buried someplace on the ranch, so I said Bob would be the place, so Bob's in a valve can. But up this draw right here that you can see going to the southeast, there's a spring development, a pit pond that I built in '86 that flows about 10 to 15 gallons of water a minute. I have a solar pump down there that pumps water up to Bob, and then if you look over between Bob and that, you can see one of the tanks. There's actually 6 tanks, and that runs all the way to the very north end of the property, which is over 1.5 miles. So there's about 3 miles of pipeline, and it's all serviced by Bob. It's all gravity flowed to Bob. It came about through an EQIP, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came in with the money to help put the solar panels down there, because the power company wanted $18,000 to put the power down there, and now it's free. All I got to do is go turn it on and Bob's full.
Okay, what this country sits on is the Permian red beds. So all of this is the outside. The Permian red beds are the bottom of the Ogallala Aquifer. So what we're getting down here then are spring flows, either short-term spring flows based on what falls here, what rainfall falls here, or some really good springs that flow water out of those Permian red beds out of the Ogallala. And down into Oklahoma, when you get there by the Salt Lake, there the Salt Plains, they have artesian wells, and a good big artesian well that's coming out of that Ogallala. So my point is, that's kind of where you're sitting on the landscape. Where we've got sagebrush, it's sandy or sandy loam, okay? Where we're down at, on the Z-bar is a lower elevation than here, and we were onto that Permian red beds, which has a lot more shale or clay structure to it, okay? So that kind of gives you an idea of the geology, short and sweet, about where we're sitting. Ted's Ranch, this is the southern side of the ranch. The highway kind of dissects the thing north and south. There's about, what, Brian, you said about 2,400 or so acres here. In this block, it goes on there's a little pasture on the east side of the Deerhead Road that we drove down to go to the Z-bar. There's a little spot over there they call the bull pasture. Happens to have the old Fort Zara trail on it, and you can still see the remnants of that trail over there. The point of this place, and the reason we brought you up here, is that this was kind of the experimental zone of Ted's operation. So the north of the ranch where you guys were today, he explained, I'm sure, about the way he started up there with 4 pastures, and because of the topography and the lack of water up there, it was pretty difficult to get things started. This area, as you can see, is fairly flat comparatively, okay? Comparatively, fairly flat. When Ted took the ranch over, there was a windmill over here, and you can just barely see the white tank over on the far edge of the field there. There was a windmill over there, not too good a production, but there was a windmill. So 2,400 acres, 2 marginal windmills over here.
And a creek that kind of worked.
Okay. Ted took the place over. There was a spring down there just on the north side or the south side of the highway. Dug a pit down there for additional water. And then dug this well. And Brian, you can probably explain that well a lot better than I can.
The well that's just there, just east of the auto gate. This well, we pull about 6 or 8, maybe 10 gallons a minute out of it, and it'll hold that all day, every day. Several miles of pipe, something like 2.5 miles of pipeline. The watering system on the west is 2 12-foot tanks. The water system here at the corrals is 2 12-foot tanks. The water system straight east of here, over by that pumping unit, is two 12-foot tanks.
You can see it just on the north side in this direction of that pump jack there.
And where our other windmill is, southeast of here, we've got two 12-foot tanks. 12-foot tanks, they're good for bunk space. They store a lot of water. You get bigger than 12 feet, you start losing a lot to evaporation.
How deep's your well?
60 feet.
Now the ironic thing about this well is 10 gallons a minute is a huge amount of water for this part of the world. 3 gallons a minute is probably closer to average, normal. And I used to tease Ted when I got here that they primed their pumps with rocks so the pumps would be used to the hardness of the water when they actually had water trickle into the bottom of the well. And that's not far from the truth because it's very, very hard water in a lot of cases.
Brian wanted to try this because cattle, when they walk up to water, they can't pick up a leg and do this. They have to do this. And the way their throats are made, they got to bend down to drink. And when they're bent down to drink, they can't move forward and step down. We haven't had cattle in there. Now, every once in a while, there's a calf that'll jump in there. This watering system supplies these 3 paddocks. This one is quite large. This is like 220 acres, and this is like 160. I have one solar energizer that sits at the wood post that supplies electricity for this whole thing. The cable we sell at the Barber County Conservation District runs about $350 for 2 miles. The springs are from New Zealand. They're called G Springs, and the whole system is I just try to simplify things as down to a minimum. Watering center distance, this is almost right. We just came out of here on the 22nd of last month with 275 head of cows, and you can see there isn't any manure right around here. Now, when they were in that paddock, to make them move that way, we fenced it off, and that was 1 day of manure buildup right there. The water for this comes from the house. There's 2 tanks on this system. It's pipeline. This is a 2-inch line.
Poly?
PVC, Schedule 40. From here to the house, it's just a little over a half a mile, but it runs along the terrain to here. So the project is to go down to that fence line.
Off of this tank?
Oh, yeah, the tank, the valve is over there, so that's a future plan, just to get water into that paddock and over there. So
Ted, what's the wire thing on there?
what's the wire thing? Brian's involved in the Conservation Security Program, the CSP program, and he's getting cost share or paid because of our stewardship, and that's a thing to let birds and other things that get into the tank get out.
Wildlife escape ramp.
Right, I couldn't think of that name. Yeah. You know, here's the amazing thing. I've done this. I've got tanks that I put in '88. I've found maybe 2 skunks, 1 raccoon, and a couple of meadowlarks in my tanks.
Where do you put your tanks? You put your tanks where the tanks make sense to be. You put the tank where it wants to be, and then you dig a hole for it. I dig down about 2 feet, put 4 inches of sand in it, put the tank in, and backfill. So my tanks, which you guys saw at the first stop, you saw how my tanks were only this far out of the ground. How does a cow want to drink? She wants to have her head down. Somebody explained it to me recently as to why the cow wants to have her head down. It has to do with the glands in their neck and making digestive juices. So the cow wants to have her head down, and when you have your water tank up high, that's a motion, and it's not how the cow was built to drink. She wants to drink from foot level. And if you give her the choice between drinking at chest level and foot level, she'll drink at foot level every time. So you set the tank in the ground, setting the tank in the ground and locking it in with the rock and the dirt like we have, the tank's never going to move. It's below grade. So when you put a tank on concrete or when you put a tank on rock and you just put it on the surface, everything around it is going to get beat down. You're going to end up with your tank up high on a pedestal. When you start with your tank low, your tank always stays low. And if they try to beat the ground down around it, it's just going to compact that dirt more. And you never end up with a tank on a pedestal. And it comes down to, you've got your two 12-foot tanks, and you don't want to have an area too big, because then your cows go hang out at your tanks. So you make the enclosure for your tanks small on purpose. You make it about the length of one cow plus the width of a cow, so the one can stand there and drink and they can circle behind. If you make it small, they get in and they get out fast, but you have to have a big gate opening, and you get restricted to the number of paddocks you can have around a set of tanks by getting small gates.
So you have two tanks together, or are they spaced out?
They're spaced out.
Okay.
With the same concept, you've got a cow and room for in the middle.
Okay.
Yep. And timing the way the cows drink, and I'm sure that you guys have done a lot of that, watching a cow herd come into a tank like that, it takes about 7 minutes for a cow to get a full drink of water. If the water's available right there and she doesn't hear the water running in the tank and feel like she's not gonna get her share, okay? Those two things are pretty critical. So those cows will go up, stick their nose in the tank, they'll drink and drink, raise their head up, put their head back down, drink pretty good, raise their head back up, and that whole process takes about 7 minutes. Then that lead cow will move off to the side.
There's more pressure coming in behind because all the other cows want to drink. So she's pressured in there, says there's nothing else for me to do, I got my drink. So she gets out, so more cows come in. If your enclosure for your tanks is too big, what happens? What happens when you put a tank just on top of a hill without a fence around it? That's where all your cows go and stand, right? My cows don't stand in front of my tanks all day. They go out and they work for a living.
So what those lead cows is, well, we have, at least our experience has been that those lead cows will go out there and find a place to wait. The rest of the herd will move through, but she'll only wait about 15 to 20 minutes. And then she's off to move somewhere else to go lay down and ruminate for a while. So that's kind of the reason for that whole concept of the backside, no more than a cow length and a width, and then a large opening for them to move in and out of. And that has seemed to work very well. We tried big enclosures, and all we did was get all the cattle balled up. We tried smaller places with smaller gates, and we got the gate posts knocked down and taken out. So we've come to the conclusion now through trial and error of the 20-foot gates with the small space on the back side. Yes, sir.
That's interesting about the trough, or watering trough. But we use a tire, and we don't have a fence around it. And the cows go up and drink, go on about their business. I hope they do. I'm gonna watch them closer.
Yeah, if you're not using it as a radial for, if you're not using it as a water center for multiple paddocks, what you're doing is great. That works really, really well.
Do you have redundancy on your water system in case your well goes down or power goes off?
Come fix my water well right now.
So you don't have big bulk storage anywhere?
Well, the good part
No.
is that we've got the water in those tanks. We've got water in these tanks and those tanks and the one down there
Our backup water
Is a
is
pit.
on the creek and a pit pond.
and a
Okay, so
spring.
you can always turn
And
to that if you had to.
If I'm on this end of the if I'm on this end and I have a failure that's going to take more than 48 hours to fix, we're going to water.
Yeah.
And it's a mile. Other water, the rest of the ranch is set up similarly with water systems that are, the primary use, and there's supplementary secondary water sources, pit ponds and ponds that we've dug and creeks and such.
But your question is really critical for those interested in putting in water systems.
Yeah, don't put
Because
all your eggs
making-
in one basket. Have
Making
a
sure
plan
that
B.
you've got that extra storage, extra days is pretty crucial.
What's your tanks gallonage wise? What do they hold roughly?
12 feet.
Huh?
They're
No,
12
I mean,
foot diameter.
Probably about 1,000
1,300 gallons. Since we're talking about water systems, didn't get into this with the other group. We've got 5 watering systems on the ranch. 2 of them are pressure fed, 3 of them are solar fed. The 3 systems that are solar fed all have a minimum of 10,000 gallons of reserve water. We have one that has 18,000 gallons of reserve water. So we solar pump. And if you look on the ridge line that's past the bus, it's about 2 miles away. I've got a tank that holds 10,000 gallons on top of a hill.
Is that Bob?
That's Bob.
That's that brown
If you've
tank
heard
you see
of
over
Bob,
You
that's
can
Bob.
see him just to the right of the bus.
Um,
Yeah.
Water gets pumped into Bob at about 12 gallons a minute from a solar pump. It pumps, right now it's running 12, in another 6 hours it'll start, its output will start going out through the day. I can make about 6,000 gallons of water on a good day with that pump. Keeps my storage tank full, and the storage tank gravity feeds out to all the distribution tanks, all the stock water tanks. So if I have, that system gets checked at least once a day to make sure we're maintaining water levels, because if you watch something every day for 5 years, you know where it needs to be based on how much, how your cows are drinking. So if we don't have enough water, if we get down to where we're only having about 4,000 gallons this time of day, that's kind of a problem. Take a look at it at the end of the day. If you don't have enough water at the end of the day, just go throw a generator on so you can pump water all night. Or if you have a problem with the pump, you generally always have a day's worth of water storage in your tanks that you can always pull out of, so that buys the water well man a day or two to get there and get your pump repaired. It's an issue, and I don't know how I'm going to address it. I've tried doing some things. Wing fences don't work. Like if you have barbed wire fence, you have trailing on it, you got to move your fence. You just can't build a wing fence because the cows will just go, oh, and they'll walk around it, go right back to the fence and keep eroding your trails. We've tried throwing go-kart tires in them. We've tried putting nets in them. Varying degrees of success. The end result may be either moving the fences or doing dirt work to fill in the holes. What I thought you were going to ask and try to get me to say is, how easy is it to move your cows when you have them trained to come to water all the time? It's really easy. Second rotation over here in this west watering trap, I can do a cow move in 10 minutes. From the time I drive into the pasture, 10 minutes and I'm out and the cows are in a different place. 100% of them, 10 minutes. Because they all know, they say, oh, hey, there's that guy. Let's go see what he's doing. They come up to the water trap to see me. I open the other gate and they go, oh, hey, there's fresh grass. And they run through. And they all do it. You just walk over and you close the other gate and you go home. Makes for an easy day when your cows are trained.
You think
How about if you're not going to move them?
Well, then they just come up to see what's going on. They'll stand there.
How do you get through the gate?
And they get mad when you leave without moving.